Have you noticed how just about every product and service that we've come to rely on in the digital age is getting worse? From Google search results that don't give you any actual results to $1,800 connected refrigerators that serve you ads.
Ads in your kitchen. They could be coming to your fridge.
Watch this strut. These heels feel better than my sneakers.
You're killing it. Work it, Jake.
Critics have dubbed it AI slop because it's quick and easy to produce and created by artificial intelligence.
Who's having a royal time?
Mercedes has come up with a plan to make even more money from Benz owners. Drivers can pay a fee for some extra horsepower with a monthly subscription.
If you own something and it breaks, should you be allowed to repair it? It's almost impossible to actually do it.
Apple is treating everyone like the product. Everyone is the product. Everyone gets twiddled because you have been conscripted into the tech industry because your industry was digitalized.
Welcome to the era of Enshittification. Good day from Newsweek headquarters at the top of the World Trade Center here in New York City. This is the 1600. And I am Carlo Versano, and we're going to take a little bit of a break from the mayhem of the day-to-day politics of the Trump era today to dig into something that's a little bit of a hobby horse of mine. We've discussed this in the newsletter lots of different times, and basically why the user experience on the internet seems to be getting so bad, why it just seems to be degrading pretty much everywhere you go these days. And it's really not even just the internet. It's not really just a problem for the digital era. You've got cars now that require subscriptions to start them remotely. You've got a television viewing experience that I'm sure many others would agree is infuriating at best. The decay in our day-to-day lives, it's noticeable, and it really is everywhere you look. And there's a term for this. It's called Enshittification, and it was coined by the author, tech critic, and the longtime blogger, Cory Doctorow. Cory's with us today. His book is called Enshittification. Book is getting rave reviews. It's on bookshelves now, and people are really saying that this is the first time that someone has really put a name to this feeling that I think that we have all identified in our lives. And Cory joins us now. So Cory, welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Cory, before we get into it, define the concept, because obviously enshittification, which is a great word, explain it in your own terms. Define it in your own terms.
Sure. Well, I should preface it by saying that for about a quarter of a century now, I've worked for a digital rights group called the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And that job has consisted of trying to get people to think about these complex, technical, abstract ideas before they become very concrete, because it's kind of too late to do anything about them. And that's a business of coming up with metaphors and similes and analogies and parables and funny words. And so this is the latest. This is the funny word that seems to have caught on this time around. And it describes both a characteristic pattern by which platforms go bad, and then advances a theory of why that's happening now and what we can do about it. And so that characteristic pattern is that first, platforms are good to their end users. They find a way to lock those users in, so that second, they can make things worse for those end users without fearing their departure because of the lock-in, in order to make things better for business customers. And then third, it locks the business customers in and drains away all the value from them as well. So you end up with a kind of husk where the minimum value, kind of a mingy, like homeopathic residue of value is left behind to keep the users locked to the platform, and then the users keep the customers, the business customers, locked to the platform, and all the value is delivered to shareholders and executives. And that, I think, is a pattern that when you hear it and when you've heard it described, you can sort of see how it would apply to everything from Uber to Amazon to Google to Twitter. But what's more important, I think, is that enshittification advances a theory about why it's happening now. And I don't want to speak for too long. Maybe we can talk about it in a minute. But the high-level answer is because they can, because we stopped disciplining firms that did bad things. And so now they do them.
So you mentioned these three phases, and to me, the things that immediately come to mind, like in my own life, the examples that come to mind, something like an Uber, right? Uber comes on the market whenever it was 10, 15, I guess, years ago now. And as a consumer, you're like, oh my God, this is unbelievable, right? I can get a cab. Not only can I get a cab on my phone, I can see when it's coming, I can see who the driver is, and it's cheap. It's cheaper than an actual cab. So I'm going to start using Uber now, right? I live in New York City. New York City is one of those places where it's actually always been pretty easy to get a cab, but now you start using Uber because it's even easier. And now you try and get a cab on Uber, and it's 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 times as expensive as it was back then. The cars are worse. The entire experience is worse, right? What are some other examples? I mean, Facebook obviously would be sort of another one, right? I mean, I'm sure you remember back when Facebook came on the market 20 years ago. It was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, Facebook is like, I think, the prototypical case here. So Facebook starts off as a public service, one that's available beyond college kids, with a pretty good offer. They say, look, I know everyone that you want to talk to has a social media account on MySpace, but I don't know if you knew this, MySpace is owned by an evil billionaire named Rupert Murdoch, and who would want to get their social media from an evil billionaire? Plus, Rupert Murdoch's really spying on you with his platform, and Facebook is the platform that won't spy on you. We just show you the things that you want to see. And so people pile onto Facebook, and they get
We were
locked
also
in.
naive.
Well, look, I actually disagree that this is about naivete. I think that platforms get worse when they can, but if they can't, they don't, right? I think that's a really important point. So, Facebook locks us in through the simple expedient that we love each other more than we hate Mark Zuckerberg, but, your friends are a pain in the ass and they can't agree when it's time to leave Facebook. So you all end up stuck on Facebook. You're holding each other hostage. And so that triggers phase 2. Facebook makes things worse for end users and courts some business customers. So they start spying on you and they start showing you things that you never asked to see. And that means that they can target ads to you. And it means that publishers can put excerpts from their website on Facebook and have those excerpts sort of crammed non-consensually into your eyeballs. They get a free traffic funnel. That's very good for them. And once they get locked in, because it's quite easy for a powerful buyer to lock in its sellers, its suppliers, much easier than for a powerful seller to lock in its buyers. Monopoly is very hard. Monopsony is quite easy. Few businesses can afford, the overnight loss of even 20% of their gross receipts. So once you have one customer who accounts for 20% of your gross receipts, they really get to call the tune. So the advertisers and the publishers get locked in too. And Facebook turns the screws on them in phase 3, makes things worse. Ad targeting fidelity goes to hell. Ad prices go through the roof. Ad fraud explodes. When Procter & Gamble zeroed out their $200 million a year surveillance advertising spend in 2017, they didn't see any drop in business because it was all fraud. And publishers have to put longer excerpts just to get shown to their own subscribers, much less getting recommended. Eventually, it's just fully substitutive text from their own website. The only way they can monetize it is using Facebook's crooked advertising system. And that's the final stage. Facebook is a pile of shit. And, I think when you hear it that way, you really remember that that's what happened.
Cory, you mentioned Procter & Gamble and how they, in 2018, I think it was, they spent they pulled their $200 million programmatic advertising budget and nothing happened to their sales. That's fascinating to me. And I mean, doesn't that sort of suggest that the enshittification process, it's not just for the consumer. I mean, even for advertisers or for businesses that are, that rely on these platforms. I mean, they don't even know how Facebook's algorithms work, right? The whole thing is a total black box. So you can't even tell if your advertising budget is actually doing anything.
Yeah, I think that's totally right. Actually, one of the differences between enshittification as a theory about what's going on and some of the other criticism of tech in recent years is I don't have any patience at all for the idea that if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. If they can make you the product, you're the product, right? If you buy a John Deere tractor and you fix it yourself, as farmers have been doing with their farm implements since the dawn of agriculture, the repair won't start working until John Deere sends a technician out to type an unlock code into the console on the tractor, charges you a couple $100. It's not like the tractor was an ad-supported freebie, right? If you have an iPhone, the distraction rectangle in your pocket was not free. It was $1,000. And while Apple did turn off Facebook surveillance, when they turned off Facebook spying through their app store, they turned on Apple spying. Apple now gathers the same data that Facebook used to gather. There's no opt-out. When Gizmodo found out they were doing it, they lied about it at first. And they use it to target ads to you. It's exactly the same thing Facebook was doing. I don't think dignity and fairness are a customer loyalty program. I think that they're what firms do when they fear that a failure to deliver dignity and fairness will hurt them more than cheating will benefit them.
I think it's funny you bring up Apple, because I was going to, as devil's advocate, sort of make the point that if there's any of these big tech companies that have perhaps avoided enshittification, one might argue that it's Apple. I mean, I got the new iPhone, whatever the heck it's called, and the new iOS, and it's still a generally pretty good. I mean, put the privacy stuff aside for a second. As his user experience goes, as sort of like the interfacing with the device, it's still pretty good, right? I mean, I think that has Apple figured out sort of a way to thread this needle?
I don't think so. I mean, look, I'm not going to argue about whether the UI is good or not. I'm not an iPhone user, so I'm not really qualified to say that. But Apple's taking 30 cents out of every dollar you spend. And that means that all the products you're buying are more expensive, right? So Apple is colluding with the app market to rip you off. This has been the subject of antitrust investigations in the US and in Europe and gigantic fines, and Apple continues to do it. In fact, the European Union recently ordered them to stop and to allow you to choose another app store if you wanted. And Apple's response was, well, it was 3 stages. Their first response was, okay, we'll allow other app stores, but if we think your phone has been outside of Europe for more than 20 days, we'll delete all your apps and all your data. And we are going to charge a junk fee for every dollar you spend in that app store of 30%. So yeah, we won't be processing the payment. We're just going to charge 30% because we can. Because the next response was to and the next response was to threaten to leave the European Union, which no one took very seriously. And now they just filed 18 spurious legal objections. It's probably going to tie this up for a decade. So, you deciding where you get your software is really a matter between you and your device. And, Apple may make good decisions sometimes, but like if you want to run Ice Block, the app that Apple just took out that warns you if there's someone in your neighborhood who might kidnap you and send you to a camp, you can't, because Apple has removed that from the App Store, and you can't choose another app store.
Right. So I want to go back to something that you said, that, the old adage about if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? And I mean, I completely agree with you that like the John Deere thing is a great example. There's other examples. I mentioned before some car companies now that charge you a recurring fee to use certain features like the remote start. I think BMW, there's a big backlash against BMW a few years ago because they tried to charge for the heated seats, which was something
but they brought it back. It's now for their automatic headlight dimming. And Mercedes charges
I didn't even see that, really. Wow.
Oh, yeah. And Mercedes charges for renting your accelerator pedal. You have to pay monthly rent on your accelerator pedal, otherwise you only get half the acceleration.
It's unbelievable. So I guess the question I have is putting that aside, that's different because you are paying for the car, right? I think everybody would agree that you pay $50,000 for a new Mercedes or whatever, probably much more than that. You should get the features that come with the car. The social platforms are different though, right? Because these are free. I mean, you don't have you really are the product in the case of Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, are you not?
Mm-hmm. Well, sure, but so are the advertisers and so are the publishers, right? Everyone is being turned into the product. My point is that there is no state of nature that says how much they're going to spy on you or how much junk they're going to cram into your feed or how misleading they'll be or how little money they'll spend on anti-fraud or what have you. That's not like a thing that comes down off a mountain on 2 stone tablets. It's what an economist would call an equilibrium. They are sitting there and saying, well, how much can we extract? How little can we spend on product quality? And how much profit will we get? And one of the things they're asking is will users leave? Will regulators fine us? Will publishers leave the platform or advertisers if we rip them off? And if you can rig the game, here's an example. When Facebook kicked off and they were luring people out of MySpace, the pitch didn't end with, we're like MySpace, but we won't spy on you. It's not like anyone was going to say, okay, well, I'm going to sit here smugly on Facebook all alone and wait for my stupid friends to notice that this is better while I just reread the privacy policy, right? They had to give people some way to bridge that. And what they gave them was a bot. And you gave that bot your login and password, and it would go to MySpace several times a day, pretending to be you. It would grab all the messages waiting for you in MySpace and put them in your Facebook feed, and you could reply to them and push them back out to MySpace, right? So you could kind of solve that equilibrium, right? You could say, oh yeah, and it's much cheaper for me to leave. So if you do that to Facebook today, they will nuke you until you glow, right? They'll say, oh, you violated Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act by reverse engineering, and you violated the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. You committed a criminal cybersecurity breach by violating our terms of service. And also, You violated contract law. You're a tortfeasor who's engaged in tortious interference with contract with our users. And you're violating our patents, our copyrights, our trademarks, our trade secrets, just all of this stuff that they can just bury you in that Rupert Murdoch didn't have in his arsenal. Otherwise, we never would have gotten Facebook. And I think that had Mark Zuckerberg had the legitimate fear that he would lose more money by cheating than he would gain by cheating, he might not have cheated. And if he had the hubris, which I wouldn't put past him, to continue to cheat, then he might have been supplanted by someone who did unto him as he did unto Rupert Murdoch.
And this gets back to what this concept of like the collection action problem, or the collective action problem, right? Because you could, the argument you could make is like, look, you like Facebook, leave Facebook, right? You don't like, you don't like MySpace, you went to Facebook. You don't like Facebook, go somewhere else or go nowhere. Just don't use them. But again, the network effects are the things that are keeping you there, right? Like you're not. There's plenty of people I think who use Facebook probably against their, their own best heart, thoughts, but they're doing it because that's where their grandma is, and that's where the kids of, the pictures of their friends' kids are, right?
Well, let me plug a nonprofit that I don't work for, a group called the Light Collective that was founded by this woman, Andrea Downing. And Andrea is a breast cancer previvor. That means she has the gene for breast cancer. And she was part of a group of breast cancer previvors who were courted by Facebook and transitioned to Facebook in the early 2010s. And these communities are really important. So if you're a breast cancer previvor, you're wrestling with pretty significant medical questions like, should I preemptively have my uterus or my breasts or my ovaries removed? Plus, the women in your life are sick and dying, right? Your mothers, your sisters, your aunts, your grandmothers, your daughters, right? This is a big deal. And so this community is super important. And one day, Andrea was just poking around on Facebook. She's not like a security researcher by training. She's not a computer person by training, but she's, interested in the subject. She's very smart. And she noticed that you could enumerate the full membership of any Facebook group, even if you weren't a member. So you could find out who all the women were in this breast cancer previvor group if you just had a Facebook account. And she reported this to Facebook, and Facebook said, oh no, we're not going to fix that. That's part of the ad tech stack. It's a feature and not a bug. So they sued, and then when Obama's FTC settled with Facebook, it was one of the cases that was non-consensually folded in and settled. So they never got any justice out of this, and they're all still on Facebook, right? They're all still on Facebook because they love each other more than they hate Mark Zuckerberg. The cost of being spied on is hard to calculate, and when put up against the immediate harms of losing that community, makes people want to stay. If you've seen that documentary, Fiddler on the Roof, you may have asked yourself, how come those people stay in that goddamn village when every 15 minutes the Cossacks ride through and kick 6 kinds of shit out of them? Well, you find out in the last scene, because eventually the Tsar kicks the Jews out of the Pale of Settlement, and they're like, well, I guess we're never going to see each other again, right? And the only thing they had, literally, was each other.
I want to go back to this, the antitrust stuff. So you wrote on your blog, pluralistic, today about Google and what you called the economic mistake that allowed this company to become so big. We talked about how Google is sort of like the proto example of enshittification. The search, the Google search now compared to what it was even 5 years ago, 10 years ago, it's really unbelievable, right? You used to be able to search to go on Google. You could even click the I'm getting lucky button, and chances are you'd get at least something, probably what you like. Now you can't even you have to scroll down half the page before you even get something that's not an ad. If that's even going to send you to where you want to go, you don't know. What is the economic mistake that allowed Google to get as big as it did?
Well, let's look at the structure of Google. Google likes to bill itself as like, Willy Wonka's idea factories. Look at all of our amazing products, right? They call themselves Alphabet, and they have a product for every letter from A to Z. When you actually look at what Google has done as a company, they've had one really successful consumer product launch. It happened a millennium ago in the previous century when they made a really good search engine. They have not had a successful consumer product, almost without exception, since all the products they launched internally flopped. The products that they've succeeded with are acquisitions, and that's
YouTube
their ad
being
tech
the prime
stack.
example, right?
Yeah, video, ad tech, not just YouTube, Android. maps, docs, collaboration, satellite photos, even their internal stuff like server management. These are all acquisitions. So they're not Willy Wonka. They're rich Uncle Pennybags, right? They're buying all the other kids' toys and playing with them, but claiming that they're their own, that they thought this stuff up. And this is not something that competition law is a stranger to. The history of competition law in this country is that we had these monopolies, and they became, well, John Sherman, the senator who briefed for the first antitrust law, the Sherman Act in 1890, it was Tecumseh Sherman's brother. He said they became autocrats of trade. He said, we wouldn't allow a king of America. Why are we allowing these autocrats of trade? So they became autocrats of trade, and we understood that they got there by engaging in two kinds of mergers. They engaged in horizontal mergers, where firms bought their immediate competitors, and they engaged in vertical mergers, where they bought elements of their supply chain. So imagine a rail company that buys all the other rail companies and then buys a couple of coal mines. And so if you have a coal mine, you only have one place to ship your coal, and they compete with you. And so you can never succeed because they control this important factor of your production. There's no other logistical way to bring your coal to market. And so they end up not only owning the rail system, but they own the coal system too. And this is how these trusts, which is why we call it antitrust, this is how they expanded. And starting in the 1970s, this group of neoliberal economists, the Chicago School, started to advance these radical theories of antitrust. The most noted proponent of this is a guy called Robert Bork. Even if you don't know his name, you might have heard of things being borked as being in a very bad situation.
Supreme Court.
That's named after him. It's because he really blew his Senate confirmation hearing when they tried to put him on the Supreme Court in the Reagan years. And Bork had this conspiracy theory. He said that, first of all, monopolies are quite good. And the only time you will ever see a monopoly in the wild is if they are doing a really good job and we're all voluntarily shopping with them. And if they weren't doing a good job, someone else would come in and just offer a rival product. We'd all shop somewhere else. And so you can always tell that a monopoly is good if it exists, right? And Bork also had this theory that John Sherman and the authors of the Clayton Act and the authors of the Robertson-Patman Act and so on, that all of these authors of antitrust laws in Congress and the Senate, that they thought monopolies were great too. And they never intended these laws to be used to fight monopolies. Now, this is just genuinely a very dumb thing to say. It bears no relationship to reality as we understand it. We are talking about congressmen and senators who got up on their hind legs in the chamber and said in great detail what they were doing and why. So nevertheless, Bork is pushing on an open door. And billionaires quite like the idea that if there was an antitrust law, they could corner markets and not have to compete and cease to practice capitalism and instead go to kind of feudalism where they make money from owning things instead of from doing things. And they push this agenda. Carter backs it a little, but Reagan really lets go with it. And then his successors, Republican and Democrat, right up to Biden, with a little bit of Trump one, they buy this. They like these monopolies. They say that they're efficient and good, and they're doing good by the American people and the American economy. And every part of our economy is captured this way, including search. So Google has a 90% search market share, and they were convicted of violating the antitrust laws last year in a federal court. And one of the things that the judge found was that Google had bought its way to dominance. So they bribed Apple
via DoubleClick.
$20 billion. Yeah. Well, no. That's the ad case. This is the search case.
Right.
So there's two. They lost three, but there's two that are relevant here. So one was the search case where they bought their way to dominance. They bought every place where you might encounter a search box. So they paid Apple $20 billion a year not to enter the search market and to make Google their search. They paid for all the browsers, all the manufacturers, all the operating systems, all the carriers. They all put Google in as the default. And so that meant that no one wanted to capitalize a rival search engine because where would you ever encounter that search engine? They also did the same in ads. So they bought a company called DoubleClick, and then a whole string of other acquisitions that were part of what's called the ad tech stack. So in ad tech, you have a thing that represents publishers, right? People who own websites who have some space on the website where you could put an ad. You have a platform that represents advertisers who are looking for some space to put an ad, and specifically like a user who's in front of a space where there's an ad. So they're going like, I want to find some 18 to 34-year-old man children in the 5 boroughs who own an Xbox and have been, researching gonorrhea recently. And, if you have that user land on your webpage, you can go to a marketplace and you can say, I have this user, what am I bid for them? And so the demand side platform, the sell side platform, the marketplace, they all join together and they consummate this, and then you get an ad that's kind of creepy and grosses you out. And Google, as well as Meta later, ended up buying the components to build the full stack. So they represent buyers, they represent sellers, they own the marketplace, and also they buy and sell ads, right? They are a publisher. YouTube is a giant publisher and they buy ads too. So they are it's like if you were going to the court to get a divorce and you found out that you and your partner are both being represented by the same lawyer, but then that lawyer gets up on the stand and they're the judge. And then they call you in for a conference and you look on the bench and it turns out that they're trying to match with both of you on Tinder. And then when the trial is over, they bang the gavel and they're the ones who get the house, not you, not your ex, because Google takes 51 cents out of every ad dollar. Now, historically, the take for intermediaries, middlemen, and advertising, John Draper or Don Draper and everyone who worked for John Draper or competed with Don Draper, they took 15% out of the ad marketplace. So this is more than a 300% increase in the share going to an intermediary. And Google will say, oh, well, this is quite mysterious. I guess we're just really good at advertising. But there's a much more parsimonious explanation, which is that you are in a position to cheat like crazy. And as a judge found, they are.
And just to be clear, this concept of a vertical monopoly, it's not just digital. I mean, I think of what's the eyeglass company that owns all of the
EssilorLuxottica. Yeah.
Luxottica. That's another example, right? In the analog world.
Yeah, they own every eyewear brand you've ever heard of: Dolce & Gabbana, Coach, Oakley, Bausch & Lomb, Versace, like all of them. They're all Luxottica brands. And they also own all of the major eyeglass retailers, Sunglass Hut and LensCrafters and several others. And where they had eyewear brands that wouldn't sell to them, they'd kick them out of all the retailers. So Oakley wouldn't sell to them, so they just made Oakley not for sale at any of the places where people buy glasses. And then a year later, they bought Oakley on the brink of bankruptcy for pennies on the dollar and folded it in. Of course, anyone else they approached to buy after that.
Right. No, it's like a cartel.
Yeah, mob behavior. That's right. Yeah.
Right.
And then after that, everyone that they approached with an acquisition offer just immediately rolled over and sold up to them. So not only do they own the eyewear brands and the retailers, they also make more than half the world's lenses. And they own iMed, which is the world's largest eye insurer. So even if you're like going to Bushwick and getting a guy in a leather apron who gnaws your frames out of a whole log with his own teeth, even if he's milling his own lenses, the insurer paying for this is still EssilorLuxottica. Right? There is almost no way to escape them. And they've put the prices of glasses up 1,000% over the last decade.
So, I mean, I guess my question with the digital, I mean, again, I'm trying to, because I agree with everything you're saying. I'm trying to play a little devil's advocate here. But were we expecting too much with the digital revolution, right? These are companies have profit motives, right? That's what they do. To use the great Matt Taibbi quote, they stick their blood funnel in anything that smells like money and bring out profits at the expense of their customers often, sometimes not. So, I guess the question is enshittification just another word for capitalism? And I think you touch on this in your conclusion.
Yeah, I do have a chapter on this. I think that like the fact that they didn't do it before, we can either attribute this to a remarkable degree of self-control and executive function, which is a thing that tech bosses have never exhibited, and there's no evidence for it, or that every day they went to the C-suite and they yanked on the giant enshittification lever. And back when we enforced competition law, when our regulators weren't captured, when tech workers themselves were in high demand and could tell their bosses to go to hell rather than enshittify the products they'd like missed their mother's funeral to ship on time, when we had interoperable products like that scraper that Zuck used against Rupert Murdoch, when IP law hadn't quite banned those yet, then the lever didn't move. And what we did was we lubricated the lever, right? We made it so that if you gave in to your worst impulses, nothing bad would happen. In fact, something good would happen. You know, in that Google antitrust case, one of the things, the one about search, one of the things that they were debating in the case and that was entered into the record, and you can read the memos between the rival employees, was this moment in 2019 when Google hit a wall on search growth, where they had a 90% market share. They couldn't increase that market share at all. I mean, sure, they could breed 1 billion humans to maturity and hope they become Google customers, which is a product they call Google Classroom, but that takes a minute, right? And so they needed some other way to goose growth. And they had two factions of Googlers, and one faction led by the revenue side, a guy called Prabhagar Raghavan, this ex-McKinsey guy. He said, well, what if we make search worse? What if you have to search more than once to get the answer? That's several bites at the apple for us to show you an ad.
More ads.
And the other side, led by a guy called Ben Gomes, who was a technologist, who'd been the guy who had been responsible for building out their servers from like one computer under a desk to the global network of data centers, and was now running search tech. He was palpably horrified by this. He was like, this is my life's work. I don't want to do it. But in the end, he lost because there wasn't any argument apart from I'd feel icky. It was very clear they'd make more money doing this. There's no downside apart from his feelings.
I guess so. Back to again, me playing devil's advocate here, because you're sort of making the argument that, you know, more regulation might at least be able to, if not solve this problem, at least put a little bit of a lid on it. And I just think about the unintended consequences of regulation. And one of the things I think about is the GDPR, which is the big privacy law in the EU that's probably, 6-7 years old now. I mean, that I don't live in the EU, so maybe it has more value than I'm aware of. But to me, what that law means is every time I go to a website, I have to click a pop-up and asking me to accept all the cookies. Right. Which, of course, I click on. I don't even know what that does. But that's part of enshittification, right?
Totally. But I think that you have to have you have to understand the sort of complex contingent circumstances of the GDPR. So it's not just that the GDPR was badly written. In fact, the GDPR totally contemplated this. The GDPR was written in response to a proliferation of those cookie consent dialogues, and it prohibits them.
Oh, I didn't know
the problem is that all the tech companies pretend that they're Irish, because Ireland won't charge you taxes if you pretend that your headquarters are in Dublin. And if you're a tax haven, you have to be a crime haven, because any company that can do the legal work to pretend it's Irish this week could pretend it's Maltese or Cypriot or Luxembourgeois next week. And so you can't enforce any of the laws. And so the Irish Data Commissioner, it's a joke, right? It barely gets out of bed. When they do, sit around in their underwear eating breakfast cereal and watching cartoons. The latest Irish Data Commissioner is an ex-Meta executive, and just all the cases went there to die. Now, there's a couple of things going on to correct this, because it's kind of an obvious problem. One is that they're federalizing enforcement of the GDPR cases. So you can eventually get your case heard federally in the EU. And there's this one Austrian gadfly, this guy called Max Schrems, who's the guy whose activism initially resulted in the GDPR getting passed in the first place. And he's got a nonprofit called NOYB, None of Your Business, and they do impact litigation. And they finally dragged some of these cases into the German court out of the Irish court, but it took them 9 years. But they're going to, under the new rule, the Digital Markets Act, they're going to federalize this enforcement. They're just going to move it to the federal court, the European Court of Justice. So that's one way of addressing it. There was a leak, though, today that says that they are contemplating following in the steps of California by allowing your browser to send what's called an opt-out signal. This is when your browser transmits, like as it would a cookie, instead of things saying, I don't want any cookies. So it all happens in the background. And if
so you wouldn't have to click on the pop-up.
You would never, when you set up your browser, would say, would you like commercial surveillance? And if you tick no, then you just don't get spied on. It's how your iPhone works now, right? You tick the little box and Facebook can't spy anymore. Facebook said that cost them $10 billion in the first year, which, you love to see.
Yeah. Amazing.
So,
love it.
This is a thing California has just mandated, that firms are going to have to respect opt-out signals from browsers. And it's the thing that the European Union is, according to a leak this morning, contemplating. Now, will it happen? We'll see, right? It's, a leak is not a law, but to call this an unintended consequence is wrong, right? What actually happens here is that corrupt monopolies corrupted a government. I'm often at pains to explain to my libertarian friends that even if you are like so hardcore that you can no longer open your copy of Atlas Shrugged because the pages are stuck together, and you think the only job for the government is to enforce contracts, they still have to be powerful enough to enforce the contracts, right? If they're weaker than the companies whose contracts they're enforcing, the stronger company is just going to tell them to F off. And so the smallest government you can have is determined by the largest corporation you're willing to tolerate. And, that's a lesson I think that we have not really internalized, but that we are discovering the hard way over and over again. And it's a thing that, Europe is now really taking action on. And it's kind of a political science mystery how it is that all of these different territories have adopted a very strong antitrust posture since the 2010s, or since the late 2010s, because political scientists will tell you that the biggest predictor of what happens with a regulation is whether or not billionaires want it. Billionaires do not want muscular antitrust enforcement. They all hated Lena Khan when she was running the Federal Trade Commission. And yet this is kicked off not just in America, and it did kick off under Trump 1, the Google case that they lost and Facebook case that's ongoing. Those are both Trump 1 cases, but it also kicked off in Canada. Canada had the weakest competition regulator in the world. It had only challenged 3 mergers in its history and had never succeeded because its powers were so weak. And Justin Trudeau whipped his caucus in 2024 to give them the most expansive power of any competition regulator in the world. The Competition and Markets Authority in the UK did more work over 5 years than they'd done in 50. And that was under a series of extremely weird and bad conservative governments that couldn't govern at all. One of them famously didn't outlast a head of lettuce. The European Union, we've got the Digital Markets Act and the Digital Services Act, but also enforcement from member states like Spain and France and Germany. It's kicked off in Australia, Singapore, South Korea, Japan, and in China, where they are really going guns blazing against Chinese tech companies, because despite what Facebook spokespeople have been saying for years, which is that Chinese tech companies are an agent of the Chinese state and Facebook defends us from Chinese communism in cyberspace, the Chinese state does not like its tech companies. They're not its allies and soft power agents abroad. They're its competitors. And so they're cracking down on Chinese tech too. So, we have all of this stuff going on. I don't think anyone knows why it's happening. I don't pretend to know why it's happening. I'm very happy to see it. And you don't have to know why you have a tailwind to unfurl your sails. But it's a kind of political science miracle, right? It's like pigs have started to fly, water has started to flow uphill. And not only does no one have a theory, very few people seem to have even noticed.
It's funny because this is one of the things we've been talking about around the office here, and it's related to AI, because it seems to me like something happened in the last month or two where you are starting to see a real backlash against everyone pushing this AI stuff, cramming it down our throats. I think you could probably make an argument that our obsession with AI is part of this enshittification process, right? Facebook started I'm sure you saw this, was a couple of weeks ago. They had they created a new standalone app called Vibes, and it's just an infinite feed of garbage, AI videos, right? Slop. Here in New York City, there's something called friend.com, which is a little, there's ads for it all over the subway. It's like a little pendant you wear. And that I guess it has some, I don't even really know what it does, to be honest with you. The ads don't really say, but the idea is it's supposed to be an AI friend, something that you can communicate with. All of these ads, and I mean every single one, has been defaced, right? Ripped up, people saying, you don't need this, we don't want this, go away. So there's definitely some sort of backlash to this that I think is happening, right?
Yeah, Microsoft is having to charge its commercial customers extra to take the AI out of their cloud service. They're saying, if you want to just get Office 365, that's one price. But if you want it with AI, we'll give you a discount. Because they want to convince Wall Street that this thing that they collectively have put $700 billion in CapEx into, that they're only by their own account.
Got to be some ROI, right?
Yeah, well, how are you going to get ROI when you're making $60 billion a year on a $700 billion CapEx? They're pretending that maybe they'll do it before these GPUs burn out. They're amortizing the GPUs on a 5-year depreciation schedule, but they'll tell you that the GPUs burn out in 2.5 years. And so like there's no there. You have these 7 companies that are 33% of the S&P 500 that just pass the same $100 billion IOU around and around and around and keep booking it as revenue. I mean, I think that there is a lot of ways that you could look at AI and say, okay, well, these are enshittificatory, they're making the feeds worse. AI itself, because it's a black box and it makes mistakes, it's impossible to know whether that query that you ran used 10 times as many tokens and cost you 10 times as much because it made a mistake or because they're self-preferencing, right? What is the reason that when you went AI shopping, it told you to purchase a product that they get a bigger commission from? Is that a coincidence, or is that, a hallucination? Or is it like a strategy? It's very hard to do it. And so you have all this opportunity for enshittification. But really, the most important thing about AI is that in not very long, the number of foundation models online might fall to 0. And it's certainly going to be a lot smaller than it is now. And that's going to happen amidst an economic calamity that's going to make, the dot-com crash or 2008 look like a walk in the park.
I mean, this is what I worry about. It just seems like such an obvious bubble. And when the bubble bursts, so many people are invested in the stock market now, particularly in the tech sector, that it just seems like it's going to be a catastrophe when this Jenga tower finally collapses.
Well, it's the S&P 500. So your index tracker is in these stocks. If you've just done what like Warren Buffett told you to do, his famous advice that fits on a single postcard, right? Put your money away, buy trackers, don't look at it. You are now at least 1/3 of your capital is tied up in companies that are about to crater. And then the other 67% of all bought garbage AI from those and fired employees who were doing a job that needed to be done and replaced them with chatbots that can't do those jobs. And those chatbots are about to be switched off anyway. And so there's going to be
they're also making
very intense problem.
Energy bills go up for the heck of it.
Yeah.
Cory, before I let you go, I do want to bring, this is theoretically a political podcast. I want to bring this back to politics. I've heard people on Twitter call Trump the enshittification president. And I think Doge probably struck me as kind of an enshittification project, right? This was sort of like a failed experiment in bringing these tenets of Silicon Valley into the federal government, which didn't work at all. I mean, there were virtually no cost savings in this Doge experiment. What are some other ways in which you could sort of bring this back to the president?
Well, I mean, I guess you could take his approach to antitrust, right? Which is what I call sometimes boss politics antitrust. So the thing is, you can do anti-corruption in a corrupt way. When Xi Jinping did his anti-corruption purges in the middle of the last decade, people were really interested in whether the officials he was firing and sometimes imprisoning were corrupt or not. And it turns out you can do some pretty good empirical work to estimate whether a public official in China is corrupt, because you can look at like the loans their development banks originate and where the money lands up and how it returns and compare it with other people. And it's pretty clear that he only went after corrupt officials, but he only went after corrupt officials in the power base of his rivals, right? And Trump has a target-rich environment. Basically, every major company in America is a gross violator of antitrust law. And, in the Biden administration, they used that fact to start an enforcement action that began by sort of making a ranked list of which companies were harming the American public the most, and then investigating them in terms of their antitrust violations. And Trump's version of this is which companies he is personally most angry at, and then using antitrust to go after them. And in some cases, it's not even the companies he's angry at or the companies that he wants something out of. There was a $14 billion merger between Cisco and Juniper that the Trump administration challenged in the first weeks. And then this MAGA podcaster was put on the payroll of Cisco, given $1 million to lobby for them. And he just started like hanging around the 5th floor of the DOJ building where the antitrust division is, like a bad smell, grabbing people by the collar and saying, leave poor Cisco and Juniper alone. Laura Loomer took to Twitter and demanded to know what the president was doing. And eventually the antitrust action was dropped. The number 2 and number 3 person at the DOJ antitrust division were fired because they had displeased this Trump. Yeah. And look, $1 million to a podcaster to get a $14 billion anti-competitive merger through, that is a goddamn deal, right? Like, not only is Trump crooked, but he's a very cheap date. You thought that the participation trophy that Tim Cook made for him was a cheap deal, or that weird thing that FIFA gave him. Yeah. The trophy full of hidden microphones that FIFA gave him, but like it turns out like $1 million on 14 billion. Like if that was the ratio in the that you left at a bar on the tip, the server would chase you out and say, "I think you forgot this on the bar."
Right. Okay, let's leave it there, Cory. This is great. You've been great. The book is called Enshittification: Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. It's got some of the great cover art of the year, too. Great use of the poop emoji. It's on bookshelves now, wherever you can buy your books. You can find the book. And Cory, before we go, just where else can people find your work?
Yeah, so you can find me at pluralistic.net. That's my blog. It's open access. You can get it as a newsletter. I don't spy on you. There's no ads. But also, as I said, I work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And at EFF.org, you can find out what we're doing as an organization, including what I do with them. We were the first organization to sue Elon Musk and Doge on behalf of federal workers. We continue to do all kinds of work in the U.S. and internationally. And if you go to EFA.EFF.org, that's the EFF Alliance, and those are the community groups in your town working on these issues, from digital privacy and ICE raids to digital privacy for abortion seekers to right to repair and all those other issues that are so important at the state and local level.
Great stuff. Yeah, EFF is a great organization. We'll link to that in the description. Cory Doctorow, thanks, man. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thank you.